The ledger lay open on her desk, the ink still damp from the copy she had just completed. Georgia Hayes had been copying plantation records for 12 years, working across 7 counties in Virginia. Early on, she learned to keep her face calm and unreadable, her hands steady, no matter what words passed under her pen. Estate lists, probate papers, bills of sale. To the white clerks who employed her, they were only figures and names on a page. To Georgia, every line carried meaning. Each entry told a story. Every number represented a life turned into a price, a human being reduced to property with a simple stroke of ink. This entry, however, was not like the others. Her hand stopped halfway through a word, the quill hovering and shaking slightly above the paper. 23 children, all under the age of 10, listed in the estate of a recently deceased planter named Cornelius Draper. The descriptions were careful, detailed in a way that felt almost obsessive. Female child, age 7, hair flaxen, eyes clear blue, complexion fair as cream. A male child, age 6, features soft and refined, skin unmarked, hair golden in sunlight. Another female child, age 9, angelic expression, pale complexion like porcelain, manner gentle and cultured. Reading these lines, one might assume the document described the children of wealthy landowners. Yet beside each description, stamped clearly and without question in the margin, was the same word: property. Georgia had copied hundreds of estate inventories. She had seen enslaved people described by height, strength, skills, health, or ability to work. Never like this. These children were described as one would describe a painting or a piece of fine china. Their listed values, $800, $900, even $1,200 for a 10-year-old girl, was staggering. A strong field hand in his 20s might bring that price. These were children too young to perform serious labor. She finished the document in silence, her thoughts racing. 2 days later, when she delivered the copy to the Hanover County clerk, she asked in a careful, casual tone, as if simply curious, about the unusually high prices. The clerk did not bother to look up. Draper specialized in fancy stock, he said. Always fetched high prices. Nothing strange about it. Fancy stock. Georgia knew the meaning well. She had heard the phrase whispered in the quarters, spoken with fear and disgust by enslaved women who worked in the fine houses of Richmond. Fancy stock meant people sold for their appearance, not their labor. Light-skinned women sold to wealthy men. Beautiful children placed in homes where they were displayed like ornaments. But 23 children, all under 10, all described with such attention to European features, troubled her deeply. That evening, she returned to her small rented room in Richmond's free black neighborhood and did something she had never done before. She opened a new notebook, one she had bought with her own money, not a ledger supplied by a county office. She copied the entries again, every child, every description, every value. She did not know why she felt compelled to do it. She only knew that these records felt wrong in a way that went beyond the everyday cruelty of slavery. 2 weeks later, she was hired to copy records in Chesterfield County. Another estate inventory, another dead planter. This man had been killed in a riding accident and left behind a large property, including 17 enslaved people. Georgia's pen moved smoothly as she copied names and prices. Then she reached the children, 5 of them, ages 4 to 9, nearly white skin, hair like spun gold, blue eyes, delicate features, no visible sign of African ancestry, all listed as property. Her heart began to pound, her hand kept moving, but her mind was calculating. 2 estates, 2 counties, 2 planters dead within months of one another, 28 children in total, all described in almost identical language. It might have been coincidence. Virginia had many mixed-race children born into slavery. The system guaranteed that reality. But the numbers, the repeated phrasing, the extreme prices all felt deliberate. That night, she added the 5 names to her private notebook. She recorded the planters' names, dates of death, counties, and the names of the executors handling each estate. She told herself she was simply being thorough, that careful record-keeping was her habit. Deep down, she knew she was searching for a pattern. Georgia Hayes was not prone to imagination or wild ideas. Her life was built on accuracy, on careful attention to detail, on matching words precisely to meaning. Her father, Marcus Hayes, had bought his freedom in 1798, saving for 23 years to purchase himself, then his wife, and finally his 3 children. He taught Georgia that freedom was built slowly, piece by piece, through discipline, caution, and avoiding attention. "Keep your head down," he told her. "Do your work well. Be valuable but never indispensable. Indispensable people attract danger." He died when Georgia was 17, and she had followed his advice ever since. She ran her copying work quietly and efficiently, charged fair prices, never complained, and never asked questions that might trouble white officials. She lived simply, dressed plainly, attended church, and maintained a careful respectability that allowed a free black woman to move through Virginia's offices without notice. Now, with her private notebook spread before her, she was breaking every rule her father had taught her. She was questioning, she was comparing, she was paying attention to matters powerful men clearly preferred to keep hidden. By the end of 1849, the notebook held 42 names, 42 children, ages 3 to 11, all described by light skin, European features, and refined appearance, all valued far beyond what any child Abera should be worth, all appearing in estates of wealthy planters who had died suddenly or unexpectedly. Georgia began organizing the information. She drew charts showing counties: Hanover, Chesterfield, Goochland, Henrico, Prince George, Dinwiddie, Powhatan. She listed names: Draper, Fairchild, Harrison, Talbot, Winchester, Bryant, Saunders. She noted death dates and estate executors. Slowly links appeared. 4 of the men belonged to the same agricultural society. 3 had served together in the state legislature. 2 were connected by marriage. It might still have been chance. Virginia's planter class was small and tightly connected, but Georgia's instincts, sharpened by 12 years of reading legal documents closely, told her otherwise. She needed more evidence. She could not ask questions openly or show interest in specific estates, so she expanded her business. She wrote to clerks in nearby counties, offering lower rates, stressing her speed, accuracy, and discretion. Within 3 months, she was working in 8 more counties. Everywhere she went, she searched for the same signs: estate inventories, children described as nearly white, prices that made no sense. She found them in Petersburg, Suffolk, Lynchburg, Farmville. By spring of 1850, her notebook held 97 names. Georgia was certain now. This was not random. This was not simply the usual cruelty of slavery. It was organized and deliberate. Too many children, too many connections. Still, she did not understand how it worked. Why only certain estates? Why so many children? Why were they sold so quickly after a planter's death? She needed to speak to someone who had lived inside those households. It took 2 months to gather the courage to approach Grace. Grace worked for Malcolm Preston, a wealthy Richmond merchant who considered himself enlightened. He allowed enslaved workers to earn money on Sundays, claiming it proved his kindness. In truth, it only meant he profited from their labor 7 days a week. Grace was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and cautious. Georgia had seen her at the market before, noting how she studied people, weighing risks with the skill of someone who survived by understanding danger. On a warm morning in May 1850, Georgia placed herself near the fish vendors, waiting for the right moment, examining the day's catch with an air of casual interest, as if nothing important was happening at all. When Grace stepped closer to choose fish for the Preston household, Georgia leaned in and spoke softly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the market. "I need information about children, light-skinned children, the ones they send south." Grace's hand hesitated for the briefest moment above the fish, then continued as if nothing had happened. Her expression did not change. "Why? Because I keep finding them in estate records. Too many of them, too many tied to estates that connect to each other, and I think someone needs to understand what's going on." Grace finished her selection, paid the vendor, and moved on to the next stall. Georgia followed, careful not to appear too close. After several more stops, Grace finally spoke, her voice calm and tightly controlled. "Second African Baptist Church, Sunday. After the second service ends, go down to the basement and wait." Then she disappeared into the crowd, her basket full, swallowed by the movement of people. Georgia spent the days before Sunday in a state of anxious waiting. She knew she had crossed a boundary. She had gone from simply observing to actively asking questions. If anyone discovered what she was doing, if Grace spoke to the wrong person, if someone noticed them meeting, the consequences could be serious. But she could not stop now. The names in her notebook were no longer just ink on a page. They were children. Real children with faces, voices, and lives reduced to numbers, descriptions, and sale prices. Something was happening to them, something planned and deliberate, something that went beyond even the usual brutalities of slavery. Sunday finally arrived. Georgia attended the morning service at First African Baptist, as she always did, then walked across town to Second African Baptist for the later service. The basement was used for Sunday school and community gatherings, and after the service ended, a few people remained behind, talking quietly in small clusters. Georgia placed herself in a corner and waited. Grace arrived with two other women. One was young, perhaps around 25, with sharp features and watchful eyes. The other was older, maybe 50, her hair threaded with grey and her posture marked by the hard dignity of someone who had survived too much. They sat together in the corner, voices lowered to whispers. The younger woman introduced herself as Phyllis. She worked in a household in Henrico County. The older woman was named Sarah. She had worked on plantations in 3 different counties before being sold to a family in Richmond. "You said you were finding G records," Grace began quietly. "How many?" 97 children, Georgia replied, between the ages of 3 and 11, all described as light-skinned or white-looking, all from estates of planters who died within the last 2 years, and all sold south through the same group of dealers. The women exchanged looks. Sarah spoke first, her voice heavy with something Georgia could not quite name. It might have been anger, it might have been exhaustion. It's been happening for 20 years, maybe more. They don't speak about it openly, but everyone in the quarters knows. If you're a woman with light skin, if your children come out looking white, you pray no one pays attention, because if they decide you're useful, your life changes completely. "Useful for what?" Georgia asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. "They don't give it a name," Sarah said. "They don't call it anything at all. But there are planters, 8 or maybe 10, who made an arrangement. They pick women with the right look, the right coloring, features that seem European. They keep them apart from the field hands, give them better food and better housing, and they—" Sarah stopped, searching for words that would not say too much. "They use them on purpose to produce children who can pass for white." A cold feeling settled in Georgia's stomach. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it spoken so plainly made it real in a way she was not prepared for. "The children are kept separate too, Phi," Liz added. "They live in special quarters away from everyone else. They eat better, they're taught to speak properly, trained for housework. They're shaped so buyers say they have refined qualities." "And when the planter dies?" Georgia asked, even though she already knew the answer. "The children are sold," Grace said, quickly. "As soon as the estate goes into probate, there are dealers who focus on this, the fancy trade, they call it. The children are sent to New Orleans, Charleston, sometimes Mobile. They're sold as house servants," but she shook her head. "That's not the real reason people buy them." "How do the dealers know when the children will be available?" Georgia asked. "Everything is arranged ahead of time. The planters work with specific dealers. When a child turns 4 or 5, old enough to travel and young enough to shape, they're listed in the estate papers with special marks. The dealers watch for those estates to enter probate. Then they send buyers straight to the auction." Georgia thought of a note she had seen more than once. "Per agreement, LS. Do those letters mean anything to you?" All 3 women stiffened. Sarah's face drained of color. "Laurent Savard," she said quietly, "a dealer out of New Orleans. He's been running this trade for years. He has connections all over Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. If you've seen his initials, you're looking at the heart of it all." Georgia opened her notebook, her hands shaking slightly. "I need more," she said. "Names, places, anything about how this works." Over the next hour, what she learned made her feel sick. The system was cruel and carefully designed. The planters involved, men with names like Draper, Fairchild, Harrison, Talbot, Winchester, Bryant, Saunders, and several others, had created what was essentially a breeding system starting in the 1830s. They selected enslaved women with lighter skin and European features, isolated them, and forced them to bear children meant for sale. The women had no choice. Any resistance brought punishment, sale, or separation from their families. The children were raised apart, fed better, housed better, and trained carefully. They were taught to speak without accent, to move gracefully, to perform household duties perfectly. All of it was done to increase their value. They treat them like animals, Phyllis said bitterly. Improving the stock, that's what they say, making high-quality merchandise. The children were never sold before age 4, too fragile to survive the journey south, and rarely after age 12. By then, questions might arise, or the children might be too aware to control easily. The ideal age was between 5 and 10. When a planter died, the children were listed in the estate inventory, with careful language highlighting their appearance. Special notes alerted dealers like Laurent Savard that the children were ready. Buyers arrived with instructions to purchase certain children at any price. "Where do they go?" Georgia asked. "Everywhere, sir." Ah replied. "Mostly New Orleans. Wealthy men buy them for their homes. Some go to Charleston, others even farther, to Cuba or Brazil. Once they're sent south, no one ever hears from them again." "Do the mothers know?" Georgia asked softly. Grace let out a short, sharp laugh. "Of course they know. That's the worst part. They raise these children, knowing that one day someone will come and take them. They watch them loaded onto wagons and sent away forever." "Why hasn't anyone stopped this?" Georgia asked. The women looked at her with a mix of sadness and disbelief. "Stop it how?" Phyllis said. "It's legal. Enslaved people are property. Owners can breed and sell them as they please. The law allows it. The people who know either profit or stay silent, and everyone else would rather believe slavery is only about crops, not about turning children into decorations for rich households." Georgia sat quietly, taking it all in. She had always known slavery was wrong, but she had never fully grasped how organized and calculated its cruelty could be. "I have 97 names," she said at last, "from the last 2 years alone. I need to go back further. I need proof that this is a system, not chance." "Why?" Grace asked gently. "What will you do with it?" "I don't know yet," Georgia said, "but someone has to remember. Even if we can't stop it, it has to be recorded." Sarah squeezed Georgia's hand. "Be careful. These men are powerful. If they know someone is watching them, that person will vanish just like those children." "I'll be careful," Georgia said. But she did not stop. In the months that followed, she widened her search, traveling to new counties, offering her services cheaply just to see the records. She learned the language, the code words like fancy girl, premium child, refined features, superior complexion. These were not innocent phrases. They were signals. She found Laurent Savard's name again and again in bills of sale, letters, and transport papers. By the end of 1850, Georgia's private notebook contained 137. She had traced the web back to the year 1833 and uncovered proof that it had been operating without interruption for at least 17 years. She had confirmed the involvement of 12 planters beyond any doubt and identified another 6 she strongly suspected, based on repeating patterns in their estate records. As she dug deeper, she began to see another troubling pattern. The planters connected to this operation shared more than simple business ties. Many were members of the same farming societies and political groups. Several were Freemasons belonging to lodges in Richmond and Petersburg. They acted as witnesses on each other's wills, managed each other's estates, and married into one another's families. This was not just a business deal. It was a tightly bound network, a brotherhood built on the intentional breeding and sale of children who appeared white but were held in slavery. Georgia began keeping 2 notebooks. One was her working ledger, which she upped Ed constantly as new information surfaced. The second was a clean version, carefully organized by county and by year, with detailed notes showing links between planters, traders, and sales. She hid the working ledger in a false compartment at the bottom of her sewing basket. The clean copy she mailed to a free black family in Philadelphia, with whom she had been exchanging letters about family history research. She did not explain what the book contained. She only asked them to keep it sealed, secure, and unopened, unless something happened to her. In January of 1851, Georgia took another chance. She began quietly asking questions of county clerks she worked with, men who had known her for years and trusted her discretion. After finishing a set of copied documents, she would casually remark, "I noticed several children in the Draper estate listed with unusually high values. Was that a mistake?" Or she might say, "The Fairchild estate sold several children to a New Orleans dealer within 2 weeks of probate opening. Is that normal procedure?" Most clerks brushed her questions aside with vague explanations, mentioning paperwork delays, market conditions, or routine practices, insisting nothing was unusual. One clerk, however, reacted differently. His name was Daniel Foster, a young man working in Powhatan County. When Georgia asked him about the speed of certain sales, he gave her a long, searching look. "You're observant," he said quietly. "Most copyists don't notice details like that." "It's my job to notice," Georgia replied carefully. Foster glanced around his empty office and lowered his voice. "There are arrangements. I'm not supposed to know about them, but when you process enough estate papers, patterns stand out. Certain planters, certain children, certain dealers. The sales move fast because they're planned ahead of time." "Planned how?" Georgia asked. "Before the planter dies," Foster said. "Sometimes instructions are left with the estate executors. Contact dealer Savannah immediately upon my death. Ensure children are sold within 30 days of probate. That sort of thing. It's legal, so no one questions it, but it's clearly organized." "Do others know about this?" Georgia asked. Foster shrugged. "I'm sure some do, but it's not something anyone talks about openly. It's uncomfortable. Easier to just file the papers and not think about what they mean." Georgia thanked him and completed her work, but as she walked back to Richmond that evening, she could not shake the feeling that she was moving into dangerous territory. She was no longer just recording information. She was investigating, asking questions, and connecting facts. If Daniel Foster had noticed her interest, others might notice too. Her worry proved justified. In March of 1851, Georgia arrived at the Henrico County Courthouse for her usual copying assignment and found the chief clerk, William Graves, waiting for her with an unusual request. "Miss Hayes, I need you to copy a special set of documents, private estate records, not meant for public filing. The family wants personal copies and doesn't want my regular clerks handling them." The request was not unheard of. Wealthy families often preferred sensitive papers to be copied by someone outside the courthouse staff. Georgia followed Graves into a back office, where he placed a folder on the desk. "Copy these exactly. Don't include this in your normal billing. This is off the record." Georgia nodded and began her work. The documents belonged to the estate of Robert Harrison, a recently deceased planter. They included the standard inventory, property lists, and financial accounts. When she reached the section listing enslaved people, she saw 18 names. 8 were children, and 6 of those 8 were described using the now familiar phrases complexion nearly white, golden hair, refined and regular features. But something else caught her attention. Mixed among the official estate papers were private letters. They were letters between Robert Harrison and Laurent Savannah, dated over the past 5 years. The letters discussed merchandise, breeding stock, premium offspring, and delivery schedules. One letter from 1849 was especially shocking. It stated that the last group sent had sold for excellent prices in New Orleans, with 3 children selling for over $1,000 each, exceeding expectations. The letter encouraged continuing the program and claimed that with proper selection and management, 6 to 8 premium children could be produced annually across participating estates. Georgia's hands went cold as she copied the letters. This was not suggestion or implication. It was direct evidence of an organized breeding program designed to produce children for sale based on their appearance. She completed the work without comment, returned the documents to Graves, and accepted her payment. But her thoughts were racing. Why had Graves chosen her for this task? Did he know what the papers contained? Was he testing her, or did he trust her to handle sensitive material quietly? A week later, she had her answer. One evening, as Georgia worked alone in her room, someone knocked at her door. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and she rarely received visitors at that hour. She opened the door cautiously and saw William Graves standing there, visibly unsettled. "Miss Hayes, I need to speak with you. May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Graves entered, looked around the small room, and closed the door behind him. "I gave you the Harrison documents for a reason," he said plainly. "I wanted to see if you would notice what they contained, if you would ask questions or simply copy them without reaction." "I noticed," Georgia said carefully. "I thought you would," Graves replied. "You see more than you let on." Graves sat down heavily. "I've been handling estate papers in Henrico County for 6 years. For the last 3, I've been noticing patterns. Certain planters, certi, children, certain sales. It took time to understand what I was seeing, but I can't ignore it anymore. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It listed names of planters, estates, dealers, and dates. It matched almost perfectly with the notes in Georgia's hidden ledger. "I've been keeping my own records," he said softly. "Not officially, just because it felt like someone should remember." Georgia stared at him, unsure how to respond. "I know you've been investigating too," Graves continued. "I've heard the questions you ask, seen how closely you study certain documents. You're careful, but not invisible. Why tell me this?" Georgia asked. "Because I found something," Graves said. "Something that proves this has been deliberately organized for decades." He pulled another folded item from his coat. "Last month, a lawyer in Petersburg died. His office was cleared out and boxes of old papers were sent to different courthouses. One box came to my office by mistake. Inside it, I found this." He spread the document on Georgia's small table. It was not an estate record. It was a private accounting ledger, filled with columns listing dates, children's names, plantation origins, sale prices, transport costs, and dealer commissions. The entries covered 18 months, from January 1849 to June 1850. At the bottom of each page were neat calculations showing how profits were divided among planters, dealers, and intermediaries. This was not just a record of Sal. E.S. It was a profit-sharing system for an organized operation. "Where did this come from?" Georgia whispered. "The lawyer was Charles Winthrop," Graves said. "He handled estate settlements for several of the planters you've been tracking. I believe he kept financial records for the entire network." Graves rubbed his face. "Miss Hayes, I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. When I read these pages, when I see names and ages listed like merchandise, I imagine her name there. I can't stop thinking about what's being done to these children." "Why are you showing me this?" Georgia asked. "Because you've been working on this longer than I have, and because you're outside the system. If I report this, I'll be ruined or worse. I rely on these men for my position." "But you," he paused, "you have connections. Free black families in other states, possibly abolitionists in the North, and you know how to move quietly without drawing attention." "You want me to take this north," Georgia said. "I want someone to have it," Graves replied. "I want someone to know. Even if nothing changes, even if no laws are broken, this needs to be recorded. It needs to be remembered." He stood up. "I'll make you a full copy of this ledger. It will take about a week. Come to my office next Friday evening after the courthouse closes. I'll have everything ready. Then you decide what to do. But be careful. If these men learn someone is investigating them, that person will disappear. They are powerful, with ties to sheriffs, judges, and lawmakers. They built this system carefully, and they will defend it without mercy." After Graves left, Georgia sat alone in her room staring at the ledger. She had been searching for proof, for undeniable evidence that her suspicions were real. Now she had it, clear and direct documentation of a network that had been breeding and selling children for profit for years. But with that proof came danger. The moment she accepted the copied ledger, she would be marked, and her life would never be the same. Holding proof that could shatter reputations, destroy livelihoods, and possibly send powerful men to prison. If anyone with authority decided to act on it, that week became the longest and most frightening of George's life. She continued her everyday routine, copying records, going to church, shopping at the market, yet every hour felt heavy with fear and expectation. She kept thinking Graves might suddenly back out, or that someone would arrest her on some invented charge. On Friday evening, she walked toward the Henrio County Courthouse just as the clerks were closing up for the day. She waited across the street until the building was nearly empty, then moved toward the side entrance Graves had instructed her to use. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside, walking softly through the dark halls toward Graves's office. The door was slightly open, and light spilled out through the gap. Georgia pushed it open and froze. The office was in complete disorder. Papers covered every surface, drawers were pulled out, and filing cabinets had been searched through. Graves's desk looked as if someone had swept everything off it in one motion, sending documents everywhere. William Graves himself was nowhere in sight. Georgia's heart began to pound. Something was terribly wrong. She started to step backward toward the hallway when a voice stopped her. "Miss Hayes." She turned and saw Sheriff Coleman standing behind her, 2 deputies at his side. His expression was serious and impossible to read. "I need you to come with me." They led her to a small room in the courthouse basement. Not quite a jail cell, but close enough to feel like one. Coleman sat across from her while the deputies stood near the door. "William Graves is dead," Coleman said plainly. "His body was pulled from the river this morning. They say he slipped on the muddy bank and drowned. A very unfortunate accident." Georgia felt sick to her stomach. "An accident? That's the coroner's finding. No sign of violence, just a drowning." Coleman leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "But before his death, there seems to have been some trouble here. Files moved, P. Papers disturbed. I understand you were meant to meet Graves tonight." "I do copying work for Henrio County," Georgia said carefully. "I was coming to collect payment for last week's work." "I see." Coleman studied her in silence for a moment. "Miss Hayes, I'll speak plainly. I don't know everything William Graves was investigating, but I do know he was asking questions some people did not want answered. Important people. Folks with ties to this courthouse, to county offices, to some of Richmond's most respected families. I'm just a copyist," Georgia replied. "You're more observant than you pretend," he said. "And you've been asking about certain estates and sales. More than one clerk has mentioned it." He paused. "You've built a solid business here. People trust you. Your reputation is good. It would be a shame if that reputation suffered." The warning was clear. "I haven't done anything illegal," Georgia said, keeping her voice calm. "No, you haven't," Coleman agreed. "And I would hate to see your license questioned over some minor violation. I'd hate to see work dry up for you. Richmond is a small place, Miss Hayes. Reputations break easily, especially for free black professionals." He stood. "All of William Graves's papers have been secured. Courthouse records are complete. There is nothing more to look into. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. You may go. And Miss Hayes, I trust we won't need to speak like this again." Georgia left the courthouse without looking back. Her hands trembled and her thoughts raced. They had killed William Graves, made it appear accidental, cleared his office before anyone could uncover what he had gathered. And they had warned her plainly, stay silent or vanish. She went home, locked the door, and sat in the dark for hours. She remembered her father's words, "Keep your head down. Don't draw attention." She thought of the names in her notebook. 137 children, treated like animals for breeding, sold like household goods. She thought of William Graves pulled from the river and the convenient story that followed. By morning she had made her choice. She would not stop, but she would be far more careful. For the next 6 months, Georgia behaved exactly as Sheriff Coleman expected. She stayed quiet, accepted routine copying jobs, and avoided any estates tied to the network she had uncovered. She went to church, visited the market, and lived a life that appeared ordinary and harmless. But in private, her work continued. She could no longer investigate openly or ask direct questions. She could not seek out new records. But she could observe, she could listen, she could record what naturally passed through her hands during normal business, and she could communicate with people beyond Virginia. In November 1851, Georgia received a letter from the free black family in Philadelphia to whom she had sent her notebook earlier that year. They had shared it with members of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, who were PrEP, airing a detailed report on the internal slave trade. They asked for more information, not names or locations that could put her in danger, but confirmation of patterns, estimates of scale, and descriptions of methods. Georgia replied with great care, aware her mail might be read. She avoided names and identifying details but confirmed what they believed. She wrote that organized breeding operations existed in Virginia, involving several planters working together. She confirmed that children were intentionally produced for sale based on their European appearance and that the trade was large and had been active for decades. She included one precise figure. "In my work over the past 3 years," she wrote, "I have seen records of no fewer than 137 such children, between the ages of 3 and 11. These come only from estates that have entered probate in counties where I work. The true number must be far greater." Her words appeared, indirectly, in an abolitionist pamphlet printed in Boston in early 1852. The pamphlet examined the internal slave trade, focusing on the breeding of enslaved people for profit. One section described the trade in near-white children, detailing operations in the Upper South, where planters deliberately produced light-skinned children for sale to buyers who valued European features. The pamphlet did not name Virginia or identify individuals. It did not quote Georgia directly, but the description was detailed enough to cause an uproar. Northern News papers reported on it. Abolitionist speakers repeated it in lectures. The American Anti-Slavery Society included it in their yearly report. Southern newspapers reacted with fury, calling it false propaganda meant to stir anger and misrepresent slavery. The Richmond Inquirer ran a harsh editorial claiming, "These ridiculous accusations of breeding programs are nothing more than northern lies. Slavery in Virginia is practiced with Christian morality and kindness. The existence of lighter-skinned enslaved people reflects our mixed population, not any organized system." Georgia knew, however, that people were paying attention. She saw proof of it. Several planters on her private list suddenly sold their properties and moved west to Mississippi or Texas, or even south to Brazil. Estate records grew less detailed. Phrases like complexion nearly white disappeared, replaced with vague descriptions. Notes such as per agreement LS vanished. The system had not ended. It had simply gone deeper underground. Georgia continued her quiet work. She expanded her records whenever information crossed her desk. From time to time, she sent anonymous reports to abolitionist groups, always carefully written and never detailed enough to reveal her identity. She also kept meeting with Grace, Phyllis, and Sarah. Together they formed a silent alliance, sharing knowledge about which women and children were most at risk and which planters were still involved. They could not stop the trade. They had no power to interfere, but they could warn one another, prepare themselves, and bear witness. In June 1852, Grace arrived at one of their meetings with terrible news. "They took Mary's daughter," she said softly. "The youngest, Anna. She's 6. Light skin, gray eyes. They separated her last week and moved her to the special quarters. Mary is nearly out of her mind with grief." Mary worked in the same household as Grace. Georgia had met her before, a quiet woman in her late 20s who had already lost 2 older children, sold south. "Is there anything we can do?" Georgia asked, though she already knew. "No," Grace replied. "Preston sold her to a dealer 2 days ago. She's probably already on a ship headed down the coast." Her voice was flat and controlled. "Mary asked me to tell you something. She wants you to write Anna's name in your book. She said someone has to remember. Someone has to know she lived, that she was real, that she mattered." That night, Georgia added Anna's name to her ledger. Child number 142. For the next 3 years, she continued her work with steady resolve. When the Civil War began in 1861, Georgia watched Richmond change into the capital of the Confederacy. She copied military supply lists, conscription records, and letters between Confederate officials. Civilian work became rare, but estate inventories still appeared from time to time. Even during the war, the pattern did not fully disappear. There were fewer children, yes. The chaos of war made the raid harder. But they were still there, described in careful language, valued at prices that made no sense unless you knew the truth behind them. Georgia recorded every one. On April 3, 1865, Georgia stood in the street and watched Richmond burn. The Confederate government fled. Union soldiers marched in, and enslaved people began to walk away from their former lives. She took control of the punctuation for the first time, without asking anyone for permission. Her thoughts went to Grace, to Sarah, to Phyllis. She wondered if any of them had lived long enough to see this moment. 2 weeks later, a Union officer from the Freedmen's Bureau came to her door. "Miss Hayes, my name is Captain Thomas Bradley. I've been told you have experience with paperwork and record-keeping. We need clerks to help register freed men and to help locate family members who were separated. Would you consider doing this kind of work?" Georgia studied him quietly for a long time. Then she walked into her bedroom, reached beneath the false bottom of her sewing basket, and removed a private ledger she had kept hidden. "I have records of 179 children," she said softly. "They were sold between 1847 and 1864. I wrote down their names, their estimated ages, the estates they came from, and the dealers who bought them. Most were sent to New Orleans or Charleston. I noted descriptions, dates, and links between planters. It isn't complete, but it's a beginning." Captain Bradley stared at the book, then back at Gio. "Gia, you kept this record during slavery, while living in the Confederate capital. Someone had to remember, Georgia replied. Someone had to witness what was happening. For the next 2 years, Georgia worked with the Freedmen's Bureau, helping reconnect families and trace lost relatives. Her ledger became part of a larger investigation into the internal slave trade. With help from Union officials in New Orleans and Charleston, they were able to track down some of the children she had listed. Out of the 179 names, records were found for 43. Some children had been sold again and again. Several had died from illness. A few had escaped during the confusion of the war. 8 were reunited with family members who had been searching for them for years. The remaining 136 children disappeared into the vast anonymity of the Lower South. Their identities were erased and their beginnings intentionally hidden. But they were not forgotten. In 1867, the Freedmen's Bureau released a detailed report on the internal slave trade, including a section on organized breeding operations in the Upper South. Georgia's records formed the foundation of that section. The report estimated that similar operations in Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, and Kentucky may have produced thousands of children over many decades, children whose lighter appearance made them especially valuable to buyers in the Deep South. The report named 12 Virginia planters as confirmed participants, including several well-known political figures. It identified Laurent Savard and 4 other dealers who specialized in this trade, and included testimony from formerly enslaved women who explained how the system worked. The report caused strong reactions. Some northern newspapers praised it as vital evidence of slavery's cruelty. Southern papers dismissed it as Reconstruction propaganda. Several of the named planters filed lawsuits against the Freedmen's Bureau, claiming defamation, but the cases were quietly dropped when lawyers pointed out that the evidence was detailed, verified, and factual. In 1868, a reporter from Harper's Weekly interviewed Georgia for an article about the work of the Freedmen's Bureau. He asked why she had taken such serious risks to record the lives of these children when she had no guarantee the information would ever matter. Georgia thought about William Graves, found in the river with a convenient explanation. She thought about Sheriff Coleman's thinly hidden threats. She remembered Mary's youngest daughter, Anna, sold at 6 years old and never seen again. She thought of the 179 names she had carefully written over 17 years. Slavery wasn't only about labor, she said at last. It was about erasing people, making them disappear. These children could have passed as white. They could have lived free lives if their mothers had not been marked as property. They were proof of something people didn't want to face, so I faced it. I wrote it down. I made sure it was recorded. And now? The journalist asked. Now they're free, the ones who lived. They're adults somewhere, living their lives. Maybe they don't remember where they came from. Maybe that's easier. But I remember. She gently touched the ledger. This remembers. What was done can never be denied. The article appeared in Harper's Weekly in March 1868. It mentioned Georgia's work only briefly. She refused to give her full name, still cautious, even 3 years after the war. The article described her ledger, the network she uncovered, and the systematic breeding and sale of children based on appearance. It was widely read and reprinted in many newspapers, becoming part of the growing record of slavery's crimes during Reconstruction. In the South, however, it caused anger and resistance. Former Confederates wrote editorials claiming the story was invented, that no such system ever existed, and that the Freedmen's Bureau was creating false evidence to justify Reconstruction. Georgia read these denials with grim satisfaction. She had the ledgers, the estate inventories, the bills of sale. The evidence was real and carefully preserved. But those determined to deny slavery's cruelty would deny anything, no matter how well proven. She continued working with the Freedmen's Bureau until 1870, when funding was cut and many clerks were dismissed. By that time, she had helped document thousands of family separations and assisted in hundreds of reunions. Her work was described in the Bureau's final reports as invaluable. After leaving, Georgia returned to copying work, mostly for black-owned businesses, churches, schools, and community organizations. The pay was lower, but the work was safer. Virginia, in the 1870s, was becoming increasingly hostile to black political involvement, and Georgia knew it was wise not to draw attention from white officials. She kept her ledgers. The original notebook, worn and filled with her careful handwriting, remained with her. From time to time she added notes when she learned what had happened to a child she documented, or when someone came looking for relatives whose names appeared in her records. In 1875, a woman named Catherine Freeman contacted her after reading the Harper's Weekly article. Catherine was 28 and living in Boston, working as a seamstress. She had been sold from a Virginia plantation at age 7 and spent 15 years in New Orleans before escaping during the war. "I don't remember much from before," Catherine said when they met, "just pieces my mother's face. A small cabin apart from the others, children who looked like me. Then one day men came, put us on a wagon, and I never saw my mother again." Georgia searched her ledger and found the entry from 1854. Female child, age 7, named Catherine. Light complexion, blonde hair, green eyes. Chesterfield County, estate of Thomas Winchester, sold January 1854 to dealer M. Thompson, New Orleans. "Your mother's name was Sarah," Georgia said gently. "She appears in the same estate inventory. She was alive in 1854, age 29. "I don't know what happened to her after that," Catherine cried. "I didn't know her name. I thought I never would. They spent hours reviewing records." Georgia could not offer a reunion, but she could give information. The plantation name, the county, and the names of other enslaved people who might have known Sarah. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was memory saved from being lost. Over the next 15 years, 11 more people contacted Georgia after recognizing details from the article or from bureau reports. Some were children listed in her ledger, now grown, trying to understand their past. Others were relatives searching for loved ones. Georgia shared her records, offered what she knew, and connected people when possible. Sometimes families were reunited. More often, people learned that someone had died or had been sold so many times that their trail vanished. Even then, they were thankful. "At least I know," one man said. "At least someone remembered." Georgia Hayes died in 1891 at the age of 70. Her obituary in the Richmond Planet, a black newspaper, noted her lifetime of work documenting slavery's cruelty and helping reunite families. It mentioned her ledgers, her role in the Freedmen's Bureau, and her part in exposing the organized breeding and sale of light-skinned children. In her will, she left her records to the Library of Congress, along with a letter explaining what the ledger contained and how she gathered the information. The papers were preserved and catalogued as part of the historical record. Modern historians estimate that the network Georgia documented, 12 confirmed planters, and possibly 6 more operating from the early 1830s through the Civil War, may have produced between 500 and 800 children sold through the fancy trade. Georgia's ledgers name 179 of them, making her work one of the most complete first-hand records of this hidden part of the internal slave trade. Most of the children she recorded are lost to history. Many died without leaving records. Some may have descendants who never knew their true origins. A few may have passed into white society, their heritage forgotten or deliberately erased. But Georgia Hayes ensured that at least 179 of them were not erased. Through her careful handwriting, maintained for 17 years at great personal risk, she preserved their names. She bore witness. She made sure that even the most hidden crimes would one day be exposed. The ledgers still exist today, available to researchers at the Library of Congress. Their fragile pages are filled with Georgia's neat writing, names, ages, dates, places, and descriptions. Every entry represents a child who was seen, recorded, and remembered, even when the system around them worked tirelessly to make them disappear. What do you think about this story? Do you believe everything was fully revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want more forgotten history like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who cares about uncovering hidden truths. See you next time.